Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of 4400. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. This episode, a big focus of it was figuring out the whole Shanice and Logan situation. Obviously, like, it's been an awkward and complicated thing for a while now, especially because, well, it complicates things for, yes, like having Hayden in the house is fine, but the Shanice thing is a little bit more complicated because they're going to go away for a week and Logan's wanting Shanice to be able to sign the paper, which Bridget's like, she doesn't actually have to sign it, but he's like, yes, but I want her to be a part of this because she deserves to be just a part of, like, Mariah's life. It's complicated because, yes, she was gone from my life, and even, Bridget trying to say, like, she, like, without essentially Logan had fell apart, and it was only like 9 years ago that he started to piece himself finally back together after all this time. So she doesn't want him going down that rabbit hole again, but it is still the thing of, at the end of the day, Shanice is Mariah's biological mom, and she has every right, especially because despite how he feels about it, he realizes, like, right, she didn't, despite writing that note, like, he still has to work his feelings through that, but also the fact is that she is here, and it's something beyond her control, just like it is beyond Hayden's control. So it is the thing of, he's trying to give a little more leeway with that, but it's still like, her being gone for 16 years and just popping up in front of his doorstep like nothing happened, like the past 16 years hadn't happened. It's complicated. What complicates things even more, it's like, obviously, he walked in on her and Andre, and so that complicates things, and she's kind of a bit awkward about it, and even Andre's a little bit awkward about it, because he's like, I need you to sign this, and then Andre's like, oh, here, you'd use this pen. So it's like, right, the two men in her life, it's like, oh boy, your ex-husband, who's actually still your husband, technically. I mean, I guess, like, the paperwork got filed, so they are actually divorced, I'm assuming. In that 16 years she was gone. But then on top of that, Andre, he's even talking to Jarrell about it, because it's like, oh, Jarrell's got his whole thing with Claudette. So it's like, they are both in complicated situations. So, because Andre's not used to, as he says, like, 21st century, like, courtship, and he's like, I don't know how to really handle it. And it's like, no, it's just, we're enjoying the vibes and not really getting, well, at least that's what Jarrell and Claudette are kind of doing. Because I love that Andre was like, oh, you kind of know your way around Claudette's place, almost like you know where she's got everything at, like you've been here, like, from time to time. He's like, didn't I tell you to mind your business? But yeah, like, the things are complicated because Jarrell and Carla, but, Jarrell kind of goes along with it, is, hey, we need you to present as this big, happy family despite the weird awkwardness, because if they can be, like, the poster family by representing, like, hey, the 4400 integrating into normal society are regular people, because, yes, there are people who look at them as not human, so if we can humanize them by being like, hey, they were just people who had something happen to them, that there's nothing too wild or crazy about it, then, which even Shanice is willing to go along with it, because, for one, it is for everyone's sake, especially because the conservatorship situation, because Andre's one of the people that signed up for it, but that's because he didn't find out, Shanice hadn't figured out, like, the lawyer talk around around those contracts until after he'd already signed. Besides, he feels like he'd rather be here because he wouldn't want what happened to Mildred and Noah, like, because you can't trust any, like, medical people hired by the government, so he wants to be there to actually help people if need be. So that's kind of why he did what he did. But aside from that, like I said, we get little peeks into what Logan kind of went through, that he, at very least, he had Miss Grover to help, but, for her, I'm an old lady, I want the simple things in life. Like, the fact is, I can't be here raising a baby and taking care of a man who, like, because they weren't even, I guess they were living with Miss Grover for a while, because he couldn't even be in the house. Just like, he was just trying to find his way through, and it's like, she's like, basically, Shanice will always be with you, but she's not here right now, and so whatever you need to do, bury it so you can move on, so you can be there, not just for yourself, but also for your baby, even go to therapy. And he actually did go to a grief group where he bumps into Keisha, but then there's a complicated thing of like him bringing up his situation. They're like, whoa, your wife was a 4400. It's like, yeah, but she's back, you know, which is a little kind of like very dismissive. I mean, it's still a complicated thing of like, yeah, she popped out of my life for like 16 years, but then it also turns into the argument about the 4400, and you're just like, that kind of took over the conversation. So it's like, oh, you have no reason to be here. It's like, you know, and even Keisha kind of says like, right. Because Logan is like, oh, things aren't that simple. So she's like, in some ways they are. Because you have a second chance that no one else has. Like, yes, it's super complicated. Yes, it's super awkward. It's super weird. But at the very least, you do have you have Shanice to talk to. Because even Keisha's like, I'd give anything to be able to talk to my sister one more time. To be able to make up for their last conversation. Now knowing, like, the circumstances of her being where she was when she died was for Keisha's sake. So it's like, you know, she'd like to, you know, a lot of people like this. So, like, he was grieving in his own way because it's like, right, he married someone, he thought, like, oh, this person's going to be in my life, and then she left me to kind of raise his child alone, and I was, like, grieving, you know, and I think he has every right to still grieve, but I think it's that complicated thing of, like, she's not dead, she's here, you just have to talk it out. So, he ultimately ends up showing up, and I think this is kind of heartbreaking that Shanice is like, wait, are you trying to give us a second chance? He was like, no. Like, the fact of the matter is, we have to make a clean break of this. Like, I want you to be a part of Mariah's life. You deserve to be her mother, even if I can't be a part of that, like, dynamic. Because at the end of the day, it's a, you know, it's like we're both good people and we both deserve to move on. Because he's like, after what happened with you, I was a wreck and I can't, you know, we owe this to the people that we love to, like, make a clean break of this. Because, you know, it's like at the end of the day, we have closure. That's something not everyone gets, you know? And once again, it's not like a thing of like, I'm angry at you, I'm doing this out of, it's like, no, because I think we both, because he even explains it to Hayden later on, like, sometimes people just are meant to go down two different roads. And as he's walking with Shanice, grabs his hand, and then she sees what he went through. Because he didn't give up on Shanice. It's not like he was like, oh, it's like, no, he went to the police, and the police showed him the letter, and she saw in that memory, like, what he went through, and she's like, right. He's like, you have to let me go, Shanice. She's like, I know. And so he walks over, he's like, thank you. And she finally takes off her wedding ring, because it's like, right. Like, because she doesn't want to interrupt their lives. Because she had even said, like, I know things are weird. And even just that thing of when Mariah was like, Mom, and she's like, yes. And it's like she was talking to Bridget, and you're just like, oh, God, it's so complicated. Like I said, Logan came off a little dickish at the beginning, but truth be told, it's like, yeah, it's a complicated thing. Like, especially when you're under the impression that your ex just, like, popped in. Because even he admitted, he was like, yeah, like, I felt a certain way when I saw you with Andre, but it's like, it shouldn't even be like that, you know? So it's like, let's make a clean break of it. Like, we can't be in each other's lives. You can be there with Mariah, and we're just gonna keep this as cordial as possible, but it's like, we can't be, like, we can't. Because he'd even heard that from Miss Grover of, like, even if Shanice did pop back up, there's no going back. Because he's like, I can't, at the very least, pretend like the past 16 years didn't happen, that I didn't fall to pieces. He was like, even now, there's still some part of me that never fully recovered. So being around Shanice even more would just trigger that even more. So, like, I think it is a thing of, like, everyone has to go down their path, which I think this is the better option for everyone. I mean, because if they had continued down their route, it would have led to some probably complicated thing of an affair thing, but it's like, he's with Bridget now, she's with Andre, and I think it all worked out for the better in the long run, but it doesn't make it any less heartbreaking, because once again, for her, it's like, I was married to you, we were having a happy family, like, just a couple weeks ago for her, but for him, it's been 16 years, and to dismiss what he's kind of feeling right now, and, you know, but it's also, I feel like you could also look at it as being dismissive of what she's going through right now, too, but it's just like, right, like, also, they're two different people. It's like, I've had to grow 16 years without you, and you've had to navigate, like, a lot these past 16 years. You pretty much had to, like, have that all, like, juggled for you. Like, for Shanice, it's all being, like, she's being railroaded by all of that all at once. So it's complicated extremes on both sides, you know, so. But I think at the end of the day, it is the better option for everybody. Little pain here to save you pain in the long run, you know, I think. So there's that element to the whole situation. we are touching on a little bit more about the Manny situation, about like the code that they found. They got a little piece of it, but searching through some of Manny's stuff, Jarrell and Andre did find even more. Now, at the very least, Andre and LaDonna are still working under the impression that this has something to do with why they disappeared. Now, do they know for sure? No. And maybe this has some ties to why Andre disappeared, because Jarrell did see a green light, but even he's like, I don't know. Maybe I thought I saw what I saw, but who knows? But it's like, at the end of the day, Andre's like, this is about helping everybody, not just the 4400, but maybe even giving Jarrell some closure, knowing whether or not Manny's a part of this or not. Because we still never circle back to it, but Hayden did say, he had talked to Keisha about Manny being like, tell Jarrell that Manny's going to be okay. Like, I guess he saw the future of them, like, getting reunited at some point in time. Under what circumstances, we'll have to wait and see. Not less there's going to be future 4400 that pop through, but it seems like everyone's here, so not less Manny fell through the system, or maybe he's just lost and he'll find his way back to Jarrell under different circumstances. I don't know. That's still something we have to kind of consider, because that was like, what, episode 1 or 2 that got dropped, so we'll have to wait and see on that front. Obviously, there's the concern between Bill and Isaiah, because Shanice is confronting him because she's like, why are you working with Bill? Like, the fact of the matter is Bill knows about our powers, which I at first I wasn't sure whether Isaiah knew or not, but it seems like he didn't know. Like, he legitimately was working with Bill because he thought it was for the betterment of everyone, because for him, he's like, he even talks to Shanice later on of like, you were right about the conservative, the contracts. He's like, I looked through them, and he didn't realize what he was basically convincing people to sign, because, and he says, in my hubris, because he was someone that was like so caught up in like, oh, this is God's will, that he thought like, nah, I got everything under control. I'm going to lead these people into the light. I'm going to lead people in the right direction. And still a little iffy in certain regards, but I think at the end of the day, he is trying to do the right thing his way, because of what he can do can help them in the long run. So I think it's just he got so caught up in it that he didn't, like he wasn't able to see things as objectively as he should have been able to. So, because Shanice was worried that Andre basically exposed June's powers in front of everybody, her light abilities. So he was worried that the same thing was going to happen in this regard, because it turns out one of the people that a surprise 4400 guest is one of the people they met at Yipsy Med, the pyrokinetic, Firestarter / pyrokinetic, who now, and then also at the same time, Jarrell and Keisha are basically being handed like trank guns. It's like, yeah, they were trying to put on a spectacle, because, and Shanice figures out, right, if they activate their powers, they can kick in the conservatorship. That way the government can legally do what they want to, because the 4400 is in the larger spotlight. But if they can get public, because it's supposed to be the flip side to like, right, if we can get the 4400, like the world surrounding the 4400, it means like the government won't be able to do what they want to do. They couldn't be able to do it in the shadows, because there'll be so much public outrage. That was kind of what Jarrell kind of put that perspective out to Shanice. It turns out the government has a flip side of that, of like, right, if we kick in that conservatorship, that means we can do whatever we want to, because the public will look at them as a danger, and so they're going to look to us, the government, to help protect them from these. So that was kind of the whole point. Luckily, Keisha and Jarrell got to the guy first, and he wants to help everyone too. He just doesn't want to go back to Ipsy Med, and by showing them what he can do, they were like, oh, we'll let you go. And it's like, right, they found the perfect person. It's like, right, they wanted him to, I was about to say, like, are they going to have him burn down the entire building? But like, having a power like that out of nowhere, like, it's a very specific power that could, because any other power could be seen because we know there was one that had wings that could be seen like a very angelic thing. It's like, you don't want to put off that message. You want it to be like scary, like, oh, this person could come and burn down your house. It's supposed to indict fear, that's supposed to be the motivator. But luckily Keisha and Jarrell got to him first, and at the same time, Rev talking, on TV, which I immediately like, that's going to get interesting because of his family circumstances. It's like him being like, because this is his first public, like, well, he made his statements prior, they, you know, because Shanice live streamed them before, so there's that. Now his name being put out there again, it's like on a public scale, especially associated with what goes down with Mildred. We'll get to that in a second. I think his child's going to come back into his life in that regard. I don't know if they ever talked about whether, because it has been like nearly 30 years, what is it, 28 years for him? So the question then becomes like, I don't know if his mom and dad are still alive. They did stuff in his name, but that could have been like well after the fact. I don't know if they were still alive or not, but we know at the very least his child is. So it could be a situation of, this could be the public situation that could draw your child back to you. Maybe, I don't know. It'll definitely be interesting to see how that plays out. But it's like him on such a public platform like that, again, I think is gonna. We'll have to wait and see. But speaking of the Mildred thing, the moment she showed up, I was like, oh, I wasn't expecting you to pop up this soon. Especially with what we saw with Hayden. I thought that was going to be the thing of like, oh, well, you know, his vision of her. I thought that's why, like, when we saw her again, she wouldn't be. But it's like, no, she pops up again because it turns out Millicent is her sister. It's like, apparently she's part of the 4400 and Mildred wants her back. I wonder, how did she find out about it? I wondered, like, did they run into each other in Yipsy Med? Or at the very least, they brought it to her attention, like, oh, we have your sister, to, like, force her to try and break her. So maybe that's what that was. But regardless of it, Mildred, the moment she started using her power, I'm like, you're playing right into their hands. Like, they were missing their fire starter, now they got Mildred instead. Granted, I'm sure Mr. Green didn't want to be on the other side of that wrath, but it's like, in Mildred's, in her mind, it's like, oh, what she's doing is for everybody. And she did such a public display like that, throwing them out the window, even used her power to levitate like a heavy object, because she was about to bust his head open in front of everybody. She was going to crush his head. Luckily, Andre stopped her. Not Andre, but luckily, Rev stopped her. The sad thing, because the thing is, Mildred, because she was so consumed by her rage, she didn't give a second thought to, like, right, there are cameras around, because she didn't know what was going on. She wasn't here, but, you know, she saw this as an opportunity to get the information she needed. But also, it's like, or did she know about what was happening and figured this would be the perfect time? I don't know. Because it's like, because the problem was she wasn't thinking, in her mind, she's thinking about the others that are Yipsy Mad, her own sister, but she let that rage consume her because she wasn't thinking about the other 400. But, you know, by putting their powers on display, you're going to make basically the world fear you more. So you're like, damn, like, even without, sadly, she played right into it. And now it was on TV. Now, the thing is, it is television. It could be like, well, that was fake, right? Like, I mean, yeah, that was, yeah. But people who already look at the 4400 as, oh, they're something else, they're going to jump into that and be like, no. Like, any conspiracy theorists who weren't already on the 44, like, not human bandwagon will probably jump on it now. Like, those who are already against them, those who might have been on the fence, will slide this way. But others will be like, that could have been like a publicity stunt. Like, it's just, you know, it's not real, you know. So that's the thing. You know, that could be spun. You know, I think it's going to be a divisive situation going forward. But other than that, we did have Mildred tried to use her powers against Rev. It's like, right, you're trying to stop me. I thought you were on my side. And tries to use her powers, but she can't. And it's like, what did you do to me? He was like, I don't know, but run. And it's like, okay. So now Rev has discovered his ability. And his ability is either a rogue situation of he can temporarily borrow someone. Well, not rogue. Well, rogue / Peter from Heroes type of situation of like, temporary gaining abilities, because he didn't use them in that moment, so I'm kind of not leaning that direction. I'm leaning more, we'll have to wait and see, but I'm leaning in more the other direction, that he has the power to block abilities. To me, I think that's just always the interesting thing about, like, powers and stuff of manifesting like this, because to me, it's nature's way to balance everything out, like, that all these powers exist, and there has to be a countermeasure to balance it out, and it seems like Rev is that. I think he can temporarily, like, focus on, he can block your abilities. Now I'm curious if given long enough, like if that is what this is, like I said, it could end up being a thing of he can take your powers temporarily. He just wasn't in a situation to use them at the moment. Just like Andre accidentally used his abilities, but he didn't really find out the ramifications and how it worked until like the next episode. So maybe it's kind of something in a similar regard in that case of like maybe he has it, or maybe it is just he can temporarily shut your abilities down. So but I wonder, like, if he focuses, could he, like, block it for longer periods of time or not? So he's going to be kind of like the equalizer to it all to an extent, which I'm sure the government's going to love him because it's like, oh, they'll be able to control abilities and people, you know, however they want to. They find out what Rev can do. So we'll see. Because it also separates things a little bit because it's like, for one, it's like, he probably was thinking the entire time maybe he doesn't have an ability. I don't know if he never really presented, you know, the example I go to is like Nathan from Misfits. Nathan was all about like, oh, I got to figure out what my power is because everyone else displayed powers except for him for a long period of time. And then eventually you find out what his ability was. So I'm wondering, like, was Rev doing that? Because they never displayed that until now. But also you add in the fact is that he is who he is, that he has this, like, way of swaying people that, you know, it's like he believes, like, God gave me a purpose. And it's like, yeah, God kind of gave you a very specific ability, like I said, to balance the scales in this whole thing. But also, it's like, for him to have that much power over, the 4400, that basically all these powers mean nothing in front of him. I think it's just kind of an interesting thing to think about. Just, like, with what his positioning is as leader, plus he has the power to shut down abilities. You know, a parallel that will kind of, I don't know if they're going to go down this route, but, it kind of slightly reminds me of Duke from Haven. How his family, like how their curse kind of worked when it came to their troubles, you know, their affliction. Like it reminds me of that to a certain extent. So I think that's so fascinating. But other than that, it's definitely going to be really interesting to see how that progresses going forward. But because of Mildred's display, there's been, you know, obviously now Logan's found out about the abilities, and he talked to Keisha about it, and she pretty much knew where she thought she might find Hayden, and so Logan tracks him down, and Hayden's like, right, you want me to pack and leave, but he's like, no, like, I'm not mad at you, I'm mad at the people for not telling me, like, keeping this a secret, but I'm not mad at you, because Hayden blames himself, because he's like, if I'd gotten to Mildred sooner, if I knew that something was wrong, if I'd actually helped her, like, he saw what her future was, which we definitely see her going down, like I said, the revolutionary route, like, she's going to go down the more extremist route of, like, right, I'm going to use violence if I need to rescue the people that have been captured, so they're going to be the prime example, like her and those who side with her are going to be the prime example of why you should fear the 4400. You know, it's going to be that type of thing. And he saw that future and he didn't say anything. He didn't do anything to like try and change that at the very least. Can he even change the future? It's the big thing too. It's like, because it seems like no matter what happens, what he sees is set in stone. There's no changing it. It's just the context around it. He finally understands when things play out, the context around it, but everything plays out the way it happens in his vision. He just doesn't have the context for it. So we'll see how that, but like I said, that's why he, had such heavy regret, because he feels like he didn't help Mildred. But then Logan says what he says about, like, right, like, sometimes it feels like you're giving up on the people you love, but if you've given all that you can for them in the relationship, that's all you can do. You know, sometimes maybe it's just that you were meant to go down two different roads. He was speaking from his own experience, the whole Shanice thing, but also, you know, about Hayden and Mildred. So they're definitely going to be on opposite sides of things, but I think Hayden's going to try and do what he can to still save her in the end. So even he's like, right, are you sure you want me back home with you? Like, don't you want to know what my power is? He's like, no, I trust that you would never do anything to hurt us. So, you know, you'll tell me what your power is when the time comes, you know? So other than that, you know, Shanice is worried about Andre, because Andre's like preparing, like, you know, he was preparing like a special like date or kind of thing for them, you know, dinner and stuff. But she breaks the news to him, and she's worried about what will happen to everyone who signed a conservatorship, and even him. But for him, it's like, right, that's tomorrow's problem. At the very least, we dance like there is still tomorrow. Like, we'll find a way to, but for Shanice, it's like, I just want to make sure you're protected. And he's like, yeah, me too. Like, I want to make sure we're all protected. And, as they're dancing and hugging, like, you can tell they're both scared. Who knows what tomorrow is going to bring. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see where everything ends up taking us going forward from here. I did watch this on the CW app. I was looking up stuff for next month's watch list, what's coming out and stuff. So I did see something saying that 4400 comes back. So I'm assuming it's like this was the last episode, until like January. Maybe. We'll see, because a lot of stuff is taking breaks around this time until like after until coming back in January and stuff. So I don't know. I'll look into it later to see, and if there's a new episode next week, I'll say something. But if there's not one next week and it's going on its break, then I'll include that in the comments down below, and I'll also include like the date it will potentially return. So, but I'm excited to see where the next episode takes us with all of this. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.